I bought the property for one reason most people didn't understand: the creek. It wasn't wide or dramatic, but it cut quietly through the back edge of my land, winding its way downhill and disappearing into the neighborhood below. The previous owner had told me it had been there for decades, long before the HOA existed, long before concrete driveways and matching mailboxes tried to tame the place. County records listed it plainly as a natural drainage easement. Nothing fancy, just water doing what water had always done. Or at least, it had, until one morning when it didn't. After a week of heavy rain, I noticed something strange. The water level behind my property wasn't dropping. Normally, the creek would swell, rush, and then settle back into its shallow, murmuring routine. This time, it just sat there. Still. Silent. The ground near the bank had turned spongy under my boots, and the usual trickle downstream was gone entirely. When I followed the creek line toward the HOA neighborhood, the answer appeared all at once, and it made my stomach drop. A solid slab of fresh concrete stretched across the channel, buried under decorative rocks and mulch, as if someone thought nature wouldn't notice. It turned out the HOA had decided the creek was unsightly. According to a neighbor who quietly pulled me aside, the board wanted a cleaner look near the walking path. No mud, no water, no mosquitoes. So they hired a contractor and filled it in. No permits. No environmental review. No notice to upstream property owners. Just concrete poured directly into a natural waterway, like it was a crack in a sidewalk instead of a drainage system that served half the area. When I emailed the HOA president to ask what was going on, the response came fast and dismissive. Asterisk, the association made improvements within its boundaries. This does not affect your property. Asterisk. That was the first lie. Within days, my backyard began to change. Puddles formed where grass used to be. Water crept outward, swallowing the lower edge of my fence line. The soil near my shed darkened and softened, and the smell, earthy, stagnant, wrong, hung in the air after sunset. Frogs appeared where I'd never seen them before. Then mosquitoes. The water had nowhere to go, and it was backing up exactly the way gravity demanded it would. Meanwhile, the HOA sent out a cheerful newsletter celebrating the beautification project, complete with photos of smiling board members standing proudly on top of the buried creek. When I pushed back harder, the tone changed. The HOA president accused me of exaggerating, then implied I was trying to extort the association for repairs. She told me, on record, that if I had water problems, I should improve my own drainage and stop blaming the HOA for natural conditions. That's when I realized something important. They didn't just ignore the law. They assumed no one would ever enforce it. They believed concrete, confidence, and silence would make the problem disappear. They were wrong. Water is patient. And inspectors, when finally called, are very thorough. The first complaint I filed was polite, almost apologetic. I emailed the HOA again, attaching photos of the pooling water and a short video showing how the creek simply stopped at the concrete barrier like it had hit a wall. I asked for permits. I asked for the contractor's name. I asked whether the county had approved the work. The reply took a week and came from the HOA's general inbox instead of the president herself. It was 3 sentences long and said absolutely nothing. Asterisk, the association is not responsible for naturally occurring water. Your concerns have been noted. Asterisk, that was it. No acknowledgement of the concrete. No mention of the creek. Just a digital shrug. So I went wider. I sent certified letters to the HOA board, referencing the drainage easement listed in my deed and quoting the county code that prohibited obstruction of natural waterways. I included maps, old ones, newer ones, even a satellite image showing the creek line before the pour. This time, the response was sharper. The HOA president accused me of harassment and told me future communication would go through their attorney. She CC'd half the board, maybe hoping public pressure would shut me up. Instead, it did the opposite. Because the moment lawyers get mentioned, documentation matters, and I had plenty. While emails flew back and forth, the land kept changing. What had started as soggy patches turned into standing water that never fully drained. My boots sank an inch or two every time I walked near the creek's edge. Grass yellowed, then vanished. A pair of ducks showed up one morning, paddling casually through what used to be my yard, as if they'd been invited. Neighbors began to notice. One asked if I was building a pond. Another joked that property values might go up with waterfront views. The HOA, meanwhile, sent me a violation notice for excessive moisture conditions and failure to maintain turf. That notice was the moment I stopped trying to reason with them. I forwarded it, along with my photos and prior correspondence, to the county's Environmental Services Department. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't accuse. I just asked a simple question. Is it legal for an HOA to pour concrete into a natural drainage creek without permits? 2 days later, an inspector emailed back asking for the exact location. A day after that, he asked if he could come out and take a look. I said yes and made sure the concrete slab was clearly visible, rocks and all. The HOA didn't know any of this. They were still sending emails telling me to fix my drainage issues and warning about fines if I didn't restore my lawn. I let them talk. I let them document their own indifference. When the inspector finally arrived, he stood quietly at the edge of the water, looking from my flooded yard to the abrupt concrete cutoff downstream. He didn't say much at first, just took photos, measurements, notes. Then he asked one question that told me everything was about to change. Asterisk, do you know who authorized this? Asterisk. By the time he left, I had a sinking feeling, not of worry, but of inevitability. The creek wasn't just blocked. It had been violated. And soon, the HOA would learn the difference between ignoring a homeowner and ignoring the law. The second inspection wasn't announced. There were no friendly emails, no scheduling calls, no chance for the HOA to prepare a statement or shuffle paperwork. It happened on a Tuesday morning, just after sunrise, when the ground was still wet and the truth was easiest to see. 2 county trucks rolled in and parked along the walking path behind the HOA homes. Clipboards came out. So did measuring wheels, soil probes, and bright orange flags that looked wildly out of place against the manicured landscaping the board was so proud of. Neighbors slowed down. Curtains moved. Something was clearly wrong, and everyone could feel it. The inspectors followed the creek line the way water was supposed to. They started upstream at my property, where the pooling was now deep enough to reflect the sky, then walked downhill until they hit the concrete slab. One of them knelt and scraped away mulch with a gloved hand, exposing the fresh pour beneath. No erosion control. No culvert. No bypass. Just solid concrete poured straight across a natural drainage channel. I heard one inspector let out a low whistle. Another took photos and shook his head. They spoke in short, technical phrases, asterisk obstruction, unauthorized fill, altered hydrology. Asterisk, none of those words sounded small. What the HOA didn't realize was that the creek didn't just affect my property. Blocking it had pushed water sideways, saturating soil beneath the walking path and creeping toward the foundations of the homes closest to it. One inspector tapped the ground with his boot and watched water bubble up through the grass. He flagged multiple spots in quick succession, marking what he called emergent wetland indicators. That phrase caught my attention. Wetlands weren't just muddy yards. They came with federal rules, protected status, and a level of oversight HOAs were absolutely not equipped to handle. The inspectors took samples, measured slopes, and mapped the spread of water like they were documenting a crime scene. The HOA president finally showed up halfway through the inspection, power walking down the path with a folder clutched to her chest. She smiled too hard and introduced herself loudly, insisting the association had made minor improvements and that any water issues were pre-existing. One inspector asked for the permits. She flipped through the folder. Another asked for the environmental impact review. The folder closed. When they asked who authorized the concrete pour, she named a contractor, and then admitted, under her breath, that no formal approval had been obtained. The silence that followed was heavy. You could almost hear the math being done. By the end of the morning, the orange flags formed a crooked line across what used to be a tidy greenbelt. The inspectors handed the HOA president a preliminary notice and told her not to alter the site in any way. No removal. No cover-up. No fixes. Just stop. They explained that the blocked creek had created conditions consistent with a developing wetland and that further evaluation was required. The president's face drained of color. She tried to argue. They didn't engage. One of them turned to me and said, calmly, asterisk, thank you for reporting this. Most people don't. Asterisk. When the trucks left, the neighborhood felt different. Quieter. Heavier. The water still hadn't moved, but now, it didn't need to. The concrete was officially a problem, the creek was officially documented, and the HOA's little beautification project had just entered a regulatory world where confidence meant nothing and compliance meant everything. The first official letter arrived 3 days after the inspection, stamped with enough agency logos to make it clear this was no longer a neighborhood issue, it was a regulatory one. The HOA board received a notice of violation for unauthorized obstruction of a natural waterway, alteration of drainage patterns, and creation of wetland conditions without approval. Each line item carried its own potential fine, and each fine came with a daily accrual if the issue wasn't corrected. The board forwarded the letter to residents that same night with a subject line that tried, and failed, to sound calm, *, important community update. *, the word fines appeared 8 times. At first, the HOA tried to spin it. The president sent out a follow-up email blaming a single homeowner complaint for triggering the inspection and assuring everyone the issue would be resolved quickly. But the math didn't cooperate. The county gave them 30 days to submit a remediation plan, and 0 permission to touch the concrete until that plan was approved. Every day the creek stayed blocked, the fines ticked upward. $500. Then $1,000. Then more, depending on what the wetland specialists ultimately confirmed. Residents started asking questions the board couldn't answer. * Why wasn't this permitted? Who approved it? Why are our dues at risk? * Contractors were called. Engineers were consulted. And every professional told the HOA the same thing. This wasn't a simple removal job anymore. The waterlogged soil had changed classification. Plants associated with wetland environments had already taken root. The county now required a full environmental assessment, potential mitigation elsewhere, and a carefully staged restoration of the creek bed. One engineer reportedly told the board that had they installed a basic culvert, none of this would have happened. Instead, the concrete slab had turned a drainage feature into a regulatory nightmare. Meanwhile, the water kept spreading. What had started behind my property was now visibly affecting the common areas the HOA was responsible for maintaining. The walking path developed soft spots and was partially closed, for safety reasons. Lawns near the creek line stayed permanently saturated, refusing to dry even on sunny days. Mosquito complaints poured in. So did rumors. I heard one board member had resigned quietly. Another had stopped attending meetings altogether. The president, once so confident in her emails, went silent. The real panic set in when the county issued a second notice, this one warning that if wetland designation was formally confirmed, the HOA could face long-term land use restrictions. That meant no quick fixes, no cosmetic solutions, and no guarantees the area could ever be returned to its previous state. Property values came up in every conversation after that. So did insurance. Residents who had cheered the beautification project weeks earlier were now demanding names, votes, and explanations. The board scheduled an emergency meeting and, for the first time, invited the public. I didn't speak at that meeting. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for me. The photos. The inspection reports. The steadily rising fines listed in black and white. As people argued and voices rose, the water outside remained perfectly still, spread wide, soaking deep, indifferent to human frustration. The HOA had tried to bury a creek with concrete. Instead, they'd uncovered something far more expensive, far more permanent, and far harder to ignore. By the time the final determination came down, no one was pretending anymore. The county's wetland specialist walked the site with a tablet and a binder thick enough to end arguments before they started. She noted the standing water, the altered soil structure, and the vegetation that had taken hold since the creek was blocked. Each observation clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle the HOA had created themselves. When she finished, she looked up and said the words that landed like a verdict. This area now meets the criteria for a regulated wetland. There was no appeal in her tone, just procedure. That designation changed everything. The HOA was ordered to remove the concrete obstruction under direct supervision, restore the creek to its original flow path, and submit a long-term monitoring plan to ensure the wetland wasn't further damaged. But restoration didn't mean reversal. The wetland status came with buffers, restrictions, and permanent oversight. Certain areas could no longer be landscaped, paved, or modified. The walking path would have to be rerouted. The beautified greenbelt was now protected land, complete with signage warning against disturbance. The board's attorney explained it in the simplest terms possible. This wasn't going away. The cost estimates were staggering. Removal alone ran into 6 figures once permits, environmental consultants, and mitigation credits were factored in. Insurance wouldn't cover it. Intentional, unpermitted work never is. Special assessments were proposed and immediately met with outrage. Homeowners demanded resignations. And they got them. The HOA president stepped down before the next meeting, followed by 2 board members who'd voted for the project. The neighborhood newsletter stopped trying to spin the story and started publishing timelines instead, as if transparency might rebuild trust faster than denial had destroyed it. As for me, the creek finally flowed again. Slowly at first, then with a familiar sound I'd missed, the quiet movement of water doing what it was always meant to do. My yard dried out over time, though parts of it remained damp enough to qualify for inclusion in the wetland buffer. I didn't fight that. I let it be. The ducks still came by in the mornings. The frogs stayed. The inspector told me, almost apologetically, that nature rarely goes back exactly the way it was once it's been pushed. I told him I understood. Looking back, the irony still lingers. The HOA tried to erase a creek to make the neighborhood look nicer. Instead, they created a wetland that will outlast every board member involved. Signs now mark the area, explaining its protected status to anyone who walks by. Kids point at them. New residents ask questions. And every time it rains, the water flows freely, unblocked, documented, and legally protected. The concrete is gone, but the lesson remains. You can ignore a homeowner, but you can't bully water into obedience.